Welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Tom Schwab, who's the Chief Evangelist Officer and also the founder of Interview Valet. He's also an author of a book called Podcast Guest Profits, Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. So I love that because that's laser-focused thought leadership, which is right up my alley and our listeners' alley. So welcome aboard, Tom. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Peter, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's just dive right in, right? So you know the numbers better than I, but it seems like everyone and their brother has a podcast, right? But just because everyone has one doesn't mean they're using it well. So just give me sort of broad landscape, what you're seeing in the podcast world, some best practices, what's working.
Yeah. So let's, right now, here we are, 2021. There's 2.1 million podcasts out there, but there's a little asterisk, right? Less than 600,000 have actually published in the last 30 days. So let's look at, there's probably 600,000 out there, right?
And 1,000,005 in the great podcast graveyard of yesteryear or something. Right?
Yeah. It's easy to start. It's hard to do a podcast. Anybody that says doing it is easy has either never done it or never done it well. The great ones like you just make it look easy. So, and the other thing too about podcasts is it's not mass market. So everybody thinks, well, it's like Joe Rogan with, a couple million downloads.
So stay there for a minute, because I have a hard time sometimes getting that point across to certain clients and prospects, because they think about podcasting like, you and I are of a certain age, like the media we grew up on. There were 3 channels on television, right? You had to get on ABC, CBS, NBC. That world doesn't exist anymore. And in podcasting, times that by, a zillion. And I think the reality is, listen, if Joe Rogan calls, great. He's not going to call, right? So if you think about the top 5 or top 10, those are lovely. But where I spend a lot of energy communicating to clients is, listen, we've done a lot of work figuring out your client avatars. Then we got to figure out, where do they get their information from? One way they get information is from podcast. And it's not about, I think people apply the wrong metrics to it. And I'd love to get your take on, like, how many downloads do you have a month? Well, that's a metric, but is it the right metric?
And do you have the right people in the room? Right. So recently we had somebody that came to us and couldn't understand, why this podcast only had, 5 or 10,000 downloads. The other day she was on a radio station heard by 4 million people. And I'm like, what radio? And she told me, and I'm like, no, they had a reach of 4 million people. Right. It doesn't mean that everybody in Indianapolis was listening to that station at that time. Podcasts, the data shows that 70% of the people are listening to the entire episode, and you can tell what that audience is. So you think about it, in the good old days when we were jumping on planes to go talk to a group, we jump on a plane. If it was the right group, we jump on a plane to go talk to 100 ideal customers.
50, even. Right.
Or 50, right? If they were the ideal ones, because we had them in the room there, they're listening. And that's really what podcasts are. So bigger is not better. Better is better, right? Yeah. So the top 1% of podcasts get, it's about 40,000 downloads per episode. The top 20% get about 1,000. But, I remember somebody telling me they wanted to talk to Fortune 100 CEOs. And then they said, I want to be on this big podcast. And I'm like, well, why? Because I can't imagine Fortune 100 CEOs are listening to a podcast that starts with, yo, this is so-and-so. And they're like, oh yeah. So really it's a focus thing, right?
So, so the focus is because again, to me, it's yet just another form of branding or marketing, period, full stop. And I think what happens is there's a lot of folks that have gotten into the podcast space that don't have the marketing chops that someone that you do, right? So why, I always look and say, why are you making an investment in podcasting? If it's for your ego, great, that's fine. Just write that off, whatever. But if you're trying to reach a market with a message, this is a great medium to do it.
Very much so. And so many times people say, now breaking through the noise. I laugh when I hear that, because most of the time it's the people that are selling us the megaphones that are telling us to break through the noise, and we're all just adding to it. It's like, no, I want to get in on the conversation and get heard by the right people. And so, once again, the data shows that the average podcast listener now is above average education,
Yep.
above average income. These are people that are looking for new ideas. They're looking to be the early adopters. Those are the people you want to talk to.
And they're passionate about the niches that they follow, right? Versus mass media. So if you're following a podcast on whatever, I don't know, agile technology leadership trends or something, like, okay, great. I have no interest in that. But people that are following that are deeply following.
They are, and they've opted in. That's
Yes.
100% opt-in there. It's not
Yep.
just that they turned on the radio and that was the only station there. And I think the other thing too is people learn differently. So
Right.
some people
Exactly.
are audio learners, and that's how you're going to get to them. And one of the things I love about today is that you can create in the way that's easiest for you and then repurpose in other ways, right? I've
Well,
written a whole
you're
lot of
speaking my language. So for me, I prior to podcasting, I'd written a bunch of blogs, done a bunch of video, etc. And on my best day, I'm a mediocre writer, and I don't particularly enjoy it. But I knew I had to do it, and to get a 500 word blog post out, I'd rearrange the sock drawer, I make sure all the spices are, like whatever. Podcasting for me is just I'm in my zone because all I do all day is talk to people and have great conversations. So now I just hit record on a couple of those. I mean, it's ultimately as easy as it is. That's me, right? Some people would prefer to write. So for me, it's great for the brand. It's a forcing mechanism, and we repurpose the heck out of it, right? So any brilliant gems that come out of the conversations will show up in various social media. I want to go backwards a half step and see if you agree or disagree. So clients will come to me often and say, "Okay, let's launch a podcast," and I'll say, "Maybe," and they're like, "Well, you have one." I'm like, "Yeah, but I've been doing this for 3 years. We're over 300 episodes. This is the amount of money I've invested in it over those 3 years. This is the amount of time. Like, you really want to go there yet? How about we do a proof of concept?" And what I love about groups like yours, the targeted placement agencies, is that before you do the heavy lifting and figure it all out, it's really easy to go out there and be a guest on 30, 50, whatever it is. To build relationships with amazing people, figure out style, right? And ultimately build brand and net new client acquisition. So can you play with those for me for a little bit?
Yeah. And it's almost like that try before you buy, right? You can see
Exactly.
if you like the medium, you can see what you like in different hosts and different shows. The other thing too, it's not as big of a commitment, right? If you start
Exactly.
your own podcast, and most podcasts die within the first 10 episodes,
Yep.
it can be an embarrassment
Yeah.
and it can actually hurt your brand. Whereas if you go out as a guest, well, you can go out there and start going to different audiences. And I don't think it's an either or, right? Because
Exactly.
people say, should I be a host or a guest? Well,
I do
that's like,
both. Yeah, of
well,
course.
it's the same platform. That's like saying, should I be an Uber driver or an Uber passenger? Well, it depends on your goals, right? If you want to be a host, well, that's a great way to nurture your current leads or to nurture your current customers. But the idea of if I build it, they will come, that doesn't
Oh,
happen
it's
anymore.
horrible.
Right.
Horrible.
So if you want to go out and get new leads, new customers, then you've got to go out as a guest.
Well, and
So
frankly, the other benefit of being a guest is someone else has done the hard work of built an audience that matters to you. That's the hardest part. The conversation, quite frankly, is I get such a headache when people are talking about what technology to use and how to do this. And they ask me all the time, I'm like, I have no idea. All I know is I hit record and I can be engaging for 20 minutes. At 21 minutes, I turn into a pumpkin, right? And that's that. All that tech stuff is really easy. Not that it's not important. What's important to me is I'm having high quality guests, or when I'm a guest, those people have figured out a way to get 50, 100, 500, 50,000 people that are of interest, have interest directly or indirectly into what I have to say.
well, thank you for saying it because I always feel awkward when I say it, right? Why do I'm a podcast guest as opposed to a podcast host? Because it's easier and I'm lazy, right?
Right.
To do all of the work takes time. Whereas, you can leverage other people's platforms. And I honestly think today that's more valuable than leveraging other people's money, right? So if Oprah
Right.
comes to me and says, hey, I'll loan you $1 million. Well, thank you very much. But if she says, I'll give you my audience for a half hour,
Oh, man.
oh
Right.
man, I'll take the second every time.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. So let me go in a different direction for a bit, because you might have some thoughts on this. So I get pitched all the time from people directly, indirectly, and via agencies. And I think somebody, and maybe you did it in your book. I only skimmed it. Somebody needs to brief folks on sort of proper guest etiquette for podcasting. Because so for me, here's our process. Somebody will pitch us directly, indirectly, whatever. We'll scan it and say, that might be interesting, right? Basically, that person might meet the criteria, might be interesting to our audience, etc. Let's not put them on the air. Let's do a pre-call. Let's get them to know about us. We'll know about them, because I don't want to waste their time and I want to put out a quality episode. And the first thing I'll ask is, okay, what, if anything, do you know about us? And I don't know, 7 times out of 10, I get, I don't know, somebody told, they haven't even done the basics of, not that I'm expecting someone to invest days or hours, a cursory review, take a look at the guest, maybe listen to 10 minutes. And I'm shocked at the high percentage of people who are paying good money and really just show up as sloppy guests, in my opinion. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I totally agree with you. And I loathe the word pitch, because I think it's dehumanizing. You introduce a person, you pitch a baseball, you pitch an idea, but yet so many people are doing that. They're just the law of numbers. Well, I'll ask everybody. I get pitched to be on my podcast and I don't have a podcast, but everybody loves it, right? I think the word is guest, right? So how would you show up as a guest if I invited you to my home for dinner, right?
Right.
You would probably know who I am. Before you showed up, you would ask, what's the attire, or what can I do to bring value to service? Can I bring something? All the rest of that. And then you would show up there as you introduce me to all your friends. Your goal would make the host look like
great.
a genius
Okay, so
for having you. So
here's the
focus
second
more on
part.
being a guest and being a gracious guest than just trying to use and abuse somebody's audience.
Yep. So here's my second complaint, and I feel like I'm beating up on you, but I'm just, you're in this space.
Yes.
So the other piece is, okay, so then we do a great episode, awesome, and I make it really clear. Listen, this episode will come out in whatever our backlog is, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Sometimes they want to hang back on an episode to time it against something. That's fine. We'll accommodate. And then when the episodes go live, a day or two before, my executive producer will present them or their people with a bunch of assets. Hey, here's something you can put on Twitter. Here's something you can put on LinkedIn. Here, blah, 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 blah. Please help us support the program and, post it to your followers. Because again, as a host, I'm going to get to my peeps. I also want to use the guests to get to their peeps. I mean, this is a mutual beneficial piece. And I'm shocked that, I don't know, maybe 50%, maybe 40% actually go through with the follow-up promotion. And I'm like, why did you give me a half an hour of your time if you're not going to promote? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, what were your goals in getting on this program? Why did you pay money, spend time, exert energy to do this?
I couldn't agree with you more on that. It's like, why would you not promote it? Because that's going to be powerful in actually moving people from being a passive listener to an active visitor and ultimately an engaged customer. And I see more and more people saying, well, I want to do, my goal is to do 100 interviews this year.
It becomes a marathon number or something silly. Like, 100 of what? Right. Yeah.
I have said, publicly, I've done over 1,200 interviews since 2014. And people are like, wow, that's amazing. I'm like, no, that is embarrassing, right? It helped us figure out the system and everything, but you should be more discerning on that. And I tell people, and we get paid to get people on interviews. And I will tell them, why don't you do less interviews and more with every interviews? Do better interviews, not more interviews, right?
Yeah,
Because
better interviews, to your point of being a guest, you would say, I would send you a thank you note the next day. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for having me to dinner. I enjoyed meeting your friends. Da, 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 da. That's just being gracious, right? And the other piece is, given, again, we just broke 300 recently, so we're up to 300 and change. We constantly recycle them. And I don't mean recycle in a bad way, but we're re-promoting. We'll put together a bunch of them, and here's, 5 talks on authors, 5 talks on this, 5, whatever. Here's women speaking, some of the best female guests we've had, whatever. And it's not just a one and done, because I want to keep putting it out there to the world. And I hope that the guests would be a little bit more having the systems in place, whatever, to help on the promotion side. And sometimes I don't think they realize that that's really part of in expectation of a good guest.
Well, and I would say it's a problem that we've got as a society as a whole, right? Everybody is focused on transactions,
Mm-hmm.
not relationships. And to me, one of our core values is relationships are the ultimate currency.
Yep.
So somebody just, invited you on their show. Why wouldn't you build a relationship? If you wanted to talk to their audience once, why wouldn't you want to talk to them more and more?
So I
That person
love
is
that, Tom.
the gatekeeper
Yep.
to your customers.
I love that because one of the things that we'll do all the time, anytime I'm a guest, is what can I do to help you? You got something coming out, or if I'll see someone that was a guest or that I was a guest on 6 months, a year later, and they've got a book coming out or something interesting they're talking to, I'll solicit to them and say, "Hey, I'm so glad you got a new book coming out. I'm looking forward to reading to it. Flip it over here. We'd be happy to help you get it out to to our followers as well. Just unsolicited, whatever." And I have built some of the greatest relationships, either direct clients, referral partners, just all sorts of business relationships, being a guest and being a host.
My theme for this year is you're one conversation away. And
Right.
I'm so frustrated when people are, you're one funnel away, automation. There's a place for that. But the best things come from conversations. And that's not just a one and done, but to build that relationship. And I think that's one of the great things that you can do as a guest with the host, but also with the audience, right? So building that conversation means, all right, doing a great interview, but then going on the social media, promoting it, answering
Hmm.
questions, posting on the host social media to thank them for
Exactly.
being there. I
Exactly.
mean, that sounds so common sense, but so few people do it.
Well, and also grabbing the assets. I've been fortunate. I've had some amazing, amazing folks that are far more accomplished and interesting than I, right? And to be just guilty by association, to be able to share with my community, hey, I had a great conversation today with Tom Peters. Far more people interested in him than me, but I want to share that, right?
Mhm.
I want to go the last couple of minutes here in a different direction. Give me some thoughts if someone's out there, and I love how you said it's not binary, right? So I'm a host and I'm also a guest. I'm a very rigid guest in terms of I say no more than I say yes, not because I'm a jerk, because it just doesn't meet my needs, right? Like if I'm going to do it, it's got to be the right audience for the right reasons for whatever. And so oftentimes I'll look and say, those people don't care what I have to say. And even if they did, I can't, there's not, they're not the types of community I'm trying to reach. So any sort of tips starting out either as a guest or a host? And I'll just give you one example. When I started, I know that I am, short attention span, lack patience, but I'm also a savvy marketer. So the commitment I made is we're going to do 50 episodes over, I think it was whatever, 3 months, and we'll spend up to this amount of money to do it. And I'm not going to go crazy every week measuring in the beginning. I'm a big measurement guy, but you can't, oh, well, we did 5 of them and, the sun, the moon, and the stars didn't change. No, they didn't. But so I committed to 50, and then there was a flywheel effect that we're still benefiting from. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what you should commit to either as a guest or as a host.
It is a process. It's a long-term strategy, and make sure you're working the strategy correctly. And so what I see a lot of people do is say, well, I did a dozen interviews and I didn't see any results with it. And you look and it's like, well, it was just like, that's saying like I did a dozen random talks and I never got any results. Well, were you talking to the right people? Was the system there? And, I put out our entire system in the book, and, I give that book away. If
Mhm.
anybody wants a free copy, I'll give them a free copy here. But the biggest part is when you start with 2 million podcasts or 600,000, are you talking to the right people? And our algorithm really looks at 4 things. And think about this. Is it the right podcast? Do they have the right focus? Are they talking about the things that my
Sure.
audience would care about? Second thing, do they have a website? Do they have show notes that's going to point people back to find me?
Mhm. Mhm.
Third thing is reach. Bigger is not better. Better is better. But look,
Mhm.
are they promoting this on social media? Is it the right social media?
Mhm.
What's the reach there? And then finally look at it and say, do I want to be associated with this? Right? Is this consistent with my brand? More and more now, when you Google somebody's name, a podcast comes up in there too.
Right.
And
So that
often,
association piece is interesting because I'll get what I consider real amateurs saying, "Oh, before so and so would consider being a guest after they've pitched me. What are your download numbers? What are your this?" And I'm like, "Really, really? Like, wait, you're pitching me, and now you want all this data? which means you don't know anything about me. And my response is, maybe it's a fit, maybe it's not. Maybe you should take a look at the other guests we've had. And if it's a fit, great. If not, that's okay too. It's like, I don't sell hard for someone to come on because we don't need to. And there's a level of, I don't know, not arrogance, but I just find it's tacky. It's they're not following the etiquette, if you will. Tom, I wanted to just thank you for spending the time that you did with us today and sharing your insight and knowledge. Lots of folks have lots of questions and concerns about podcasts, and I think it was just fantastic that you were able to share what you did with us today. Thank you so much. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.